In a grand African household nestled in the heart of a bustling town, wealth and power ruled every corner. The house gleamed with polished floors, intricate tapestries, and fine furniture. In this world of luxury, there was no room for kindness, only status and pride. And in the midst of all this opulence, Amina, a young maid, worked tirelessly to keep the household running. Amina had come from a small village, far from the city's glittering lights. She had once been full of hope, her heart filled with dreams of a better life for her family. But now, all she had was the humbling role of servant in a house where she was treated as invisible. Her days were long, spent cleaning, cooking, and running errands for the woman who employed her, Nia, the wife of a wealthy businessman. Nia was beautiful, but her beauty was nothing compared to her cruelty. She would often bark orders at Amina, her sharp words cutting deeper than any blade. Amina was always careful to keep her head down, to do her work quietly, to avoid Nia's ire. Despite the mistreatment, Amina remained kind-hearted and patient, believing that one day, kindness would be rewarded. But as the days passed, Amina's patience began to wear thin. She was tired of being treated as less than human, of being humiliated for every small mistake. She dreamed of a life beyond these walls, of a life where she was valued. Yet, for now, she endured the hardships in silence, hoping that fate would one day favor her. It was one afternoon when Amina was summoned to the dining room, where Nia and a group of wealthy guests were sitting. Nia, always eager to show off her wealth, humiliated Amina in front of everyone for the slightest mistake she had made. The guests laughed, but Amina stood still, her face flushed with embarrassment. That was the moment. In that instant, something inside Amina snapped. She had borne enough of Nia's cruelty. No more. A change was coming, Amina's patience was about to run out, and the tables were about to turn. As the days wore on, Nia's cruelty grew more intense. No longer content with just insults and belittlement, she began to assign Amina the hardest and most exhausting chores, making sure she was always busy, always working. Every room in the house, from the grand sitting room to the kitchen, seemed to require constant attention, and Nia was quick to find fault with everything Amina did. One evening, Amina had just finished scrubbing the floors of the grand dining room, her hands raw from the hard work. She was tired, her back aching from bending over the floor all day, but Nia was never satisfied. "Why is the floor still wet?" Nia snapped from the doorway, her arms crossed in judgment. "You're so slow, Amina. Can't you even clean properly? I don't pay you to waste my time." Amina bit her lip, swallowing the frustration rising in her chest. "I'm sorry, madam. I'll clean it better." Nia merely scoffed, turning her back. "If you can't do your job right, maybe I should find someone who can." The words stung, but Amina didn't respond. She simply nodded, knowing that any attempt to explain herself would only make things worse. It was easier to remain silent, easier to keep her head down and keep working, even though every insult and every humiliation cut deeper than the last. As time passed, Nia's cruelty became unbearable. She didn't just assign the hardest chores, she made sure that Amina had to sleep in the coldest, most uncomfortable part of the house. The servants' quarters were dark, poorly lit, and barely furnished. It was nothing like the luxurious rooms Nia and her family enjoyed. Amina would lie on the thin, scratchy mattress, shivering through the night, unable to sleep because of the cold, wishing for a moment of peace, even a small comfort. But comfort was never meant for someone like her. There were nights when she would lie awake, the silence of the empty room echoing in her ears. She would think of her family back in the village, their faces, their laughter, the warmth of home, and she would imagine the life she could have had. But the pain of those memories always made her heart ache. Yet, despite it all, Amina never retaliated. She never yelled, never fought back, and never let her anger show. She clung to the belief that if she endured enough, if she remained patient and kind, one day she would be rewarded. Perhaps she would be able to leave the house, to return to her family and escape the cruelty. Perhaps Nia would eventually see the goodness in her heart and appreciate her for the hard work she put in. But every day that passed only made Amina feel smaller, more invisible. She would rise before the sun and work tirelessly until late into the night, knowing that no matter how much she did, it would never be enough to satisfy Nia. Still, she held on to that small, flickering hope that one day, things would change. But with each day of humiliation, that hope grew dimmer. One morning, Nia entered the kitchen and looked at Amina with disdain. "You're such a disappointment, Amina. Always making mistakes, always making my life harder. Why don't you just go back to where you came from?" The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, she wanted to scream, to break free from the shackles of servitude. But instead, she swallowed the rising tide of emotions, forced a smile, and said softly, "Yes, madam. I'll do better." But deep down, Amina knew something had shifted. The belief that kindness would be rewarded was slowly fading. Her patience, once unshakable, was beginning to crack. And the thought of staying in this place, enduring this life, was no longer an option. The breaking point came one scorching afternoon when the sun beat down mercilessly on the grand estate. Amina was in the garden, tending to the flowers as usual, her hands caked with dirt, her mind wandering as she worked. She hadn't noticed Nia's approach until her sharp voice cut through the air, sharp and accusing. "Amina!" Nia's voice rang out like a whip. Amina froze, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes meeting Nia's piercing gaze. "What have you done with my jewels?" Nia demanded, her tone filled with venom. Amina blinked in confusion. "Madam, You dare lie to me?" Nia's voice rose, drawing the attention of the household staff and a few guests who had gathered for a meal outside. "The emerald necklace I left on my vanity is gone. I know you're the only one who could have taken it. You lowly thief." The accusation struck Amina like a blow. She felt her knees weaken, but she held herself upright. "I swear, madam, I have not taken anything. I would never." Nia cut her off, her voice dripping with disdain. "Enough. You are nothing but a worthless maid, and I'll not have someone like you stealing from me." She turned to the guests, her voice carrying for all to hear. "This girl has stolen from me. I demand you all watch as I deal with this thief. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can get away with it in my house." The guests murmured, their eyes filled with judgment, and Amina felt her face burn with humiliation. She stood there, exposed and defenseless, her hands trembling as Nia berated her in front of everyone. "I'll have you thrown out of here," Nia spat. "You are not worthy to even breathe the same air as me." The words shattered something inside Amina. She had endured countless insults, had worked tirelessly without a word of gratitude, but this was too much. Her heart broke in that moment, but deep down, something else ignited, an ember of rage that had been smoldering inside her for so long, waiting to be unleashed. She turned and walked away without another word, the sting of Nia's cruel accusations burning deep in her soul. As the days passed, the humiliation she had suffered lingered in her heart like a festering wound. She had always been patient, always kind, always hopeful that one day things would change, that Nia would see the goodness within her. But now, that hope had crumbled, and something darker began to take root. No longer would she be the victim. Late that night, as the house fell into silence, Amina sneaked out of the estate and made her way to the edge of the village. She had heard stories of a wise elder, Mama Zuberi, a woman known for her deep knowledge of the ancient ways, someone who could guide those in need of strength. It was said that Mama Zuberi had the power to harness the magic of the ancestors, a magic that could change the course of one's fate. When Amina arrived at Mama Zuberi's modest hut, she was greeted with warm, understanding eyes. The elder listened quietly as Amina told her story, recounting the cruelty she had endured at Nia's hands, the shame, and the pain. Mama Zuberi nodded slowly. "You've been broken by this woman's cruelty, but the strength you seek is already inside you, child. You are the descendant of warriors, of those who fought for what was theirs. You have the power to reclaim your dignity." Amina's heart raced as Mama Zuberi spoke of ancient magic, of tapping into the strength of the land and the spirits that guarded it. The elder spoke of rituals, of spells that could turn the tides in her favor, but Amina knew she needed more than magic, she needed vengeance. She needed to show Nia the consequences of her cruelty. The elder's eyes gleamed with wisdom as she placed her hands over Amina's heart. The magic of your ancestors runs through your veins. But remember, the power to take what is yours comes with a price. Vengeance is never a light burden to bear. Amina nodded, a fire burning in her chest. She had no intention of going back to being a servant. No longer would she be humiliated, no longer would she be powerless. With Mama Zubri's teachings, Amina began to learn how to channel the energy of the earth, the ancient forces that flowed through her bloodline. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's training grew stronger. Her once submissive nature hardened into something much more dangerous. She learned the secrets of her ancestors, how to call upon the spirits of the earth, and how to bend fate to her will. With each lesson, the spark of revenge burned brighter in her heart. Amina knew that she would not rest until she had claimed her justice. The day would come when Nia would face the consequences of her cruelty, and Amina would make sure that vengeance was sweeter when it came from her own hands. Amina's life, once filled with endless labor, now took on a new rhythm. She had learned to harness the power that flowed through her veins, a power gifted to her by the spirits of her ancestors. She moved through the household with a quiet grace, no longer the humble maid who bent to every whim of her mistress. Each day, she grew stronger. The subtle shift in the air was noticeable, even to the servants who worked alongside her. Amina no longer flinched when Nia barked orders or insulted her. She simply smiled, calm, serene, but with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. It didn't take long for Nia's perfect life to begin to unravel. At first, it was small things, unexplained accidents around the house, a vase that fell from a shelf for no reason, a door that wouldn't open despite being perfectly fine moments earlier. Then, the financial troubles began. Nia, who had once been a woman of great wealth, started to notice her accounts dwindling, her once ample profits shrinking. Her jewelry collection, which she had always shown off to her guests, was suddenly missing pieces, gems that had mysteriously disappeared, or perhaps had never been there in the first place. At first, Nia brushed it off. She blamed her husband, blaming the servants, blaming everyone but herself. But the unease began to grow. One evening, as Nia sat in her lavish study, poring over the household accounts, she felt a chill in the air. The lights flickered, and a gust of wind rattled the windows. Her head pounded, and her vision blurred. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. Then, a voice echoed through the room. It was a whisper, like the rustling of leaves, but sharp and unmistakable. "This is only the beginning, Nia." Nia looked around, her heart racing. There was no one there. She stood up, backing away from the desk, her breath shallow. "What's happening?" she whispered to herself. But the misfortune didn't stop there. It was as though the very universe was conspiring against her. Her finest clothes, silks and furs she had bought from distant lands, began to tear at the seams, as though they had been worn for years instead of only weeks. Her precious furniture, luxurious and imported, started to decay, the wood cracking, the leather peeling. Her guests, once so eager to dine in her home, began to distance themselves. Whispers spread throughout the village of her sudden fall from grace. Business partners she had once relied on withdrew their support, and one by one, Nia's connections slipped away like sand through her fingers. In the midst of this chaos, Amina watched quietly, knowing that the time was near. She had bided her time, had patiently let Nia's arrogance and cruelty lead her down this destructive path. But now, the power was in her hands. One evening, as Nia paced anxiously in her study, trying to make sense of the chaos surrounding her, Amina entered the room, her presence calm and commanding. "Madam," Amina said softly, her eyes cool but unwavering, "there is no escape. You cannot fight what is coming." Nia turned sharply, her eyes wild with panic. "You did this, didn't you?" "You," her voice faltered as she took a step back. Amina smiled, her expression serene. "You've lived your life on the backs of others, Nia. You've treated me as nothing, humiliated me, made me feel small. But now, it is you who will pay the price." Nia trembled, her hands shaking. please, please, I beg you. I'll do anything to fix this. But Amina remained unmoved, her voice calm and steady. It's too late for you. You made your choice long ago. And now, the price has come due. In the following days, Nia's once perfect world continued to crumble. The household became a place of chaos. Staff quit in droves, unable to stand the strange and unsettling atmosphere that now hung over the house. Nia's husband, once proud and successful, grew ill, the sickness creeping through his body, no cure in sight. And through it all, Amina watched. Her plans were unfolding as she had known they would. The power she had tapped into was doing its work. Slowly but surely, Nia's world was falling apart. It was only a matter of time before Nia would come to her, begging for mercy. And when that time came, Amina would be ready. She had taken enough of the abuse, enough of the cruelty. Now, it was her turn to reign. Nia was unrecognizable. The proud, arrogant woman who once strutted through her grand home like a queen now stood in tattered clothes, her once perfect hair disheveled, her eyes hollow with desperation. The weight of her downfall clung to her like a shroud, suffocating and inescapable. She had lost everything, her wealth, her status, her friends. Her husband, once a man of influence, had fallen into ruin, his sickness leaving him weak and unable to support her. The grand house that once echoed with laughter and lavish parties was now eerily silent, abandoned by the servants who had fled from the curse that seemed to follow her. And now, with nowhere else to turn, she stood before the one person she had tormented the most, Amina. Tears streamed down Nia's face as she fell to her knees before the young woman she had once called nothing. Her voice, once sharp with cruelty, was now trembling with sorrow. "Amina, please," she whispered. "I beg you. Undo whatever you've done. I was wrong. I see that now. I don't want to suffer anymore." Amina looked down at her, her expression unreadable. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment, of seeing Nia brought low, stripped of her power, forced to feel the pain she had inflicted on others. But now that it was here, she felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Only a quiet, settled peace. She crouched down, meeting Nia's desperate gaze. "You were given so many chances," Amina said softly. "So many times, you could have chosen kindness. You could have treated me with respect, with dignity. But you didn't." Nia sobbed, reaching for Amina's hand, but Amina stepped back. "There is no magic to undo this, Nia," she continued. "This is the price of your own actions. Your downfall wasn't caused by me, it was created by the cruelty in your own heart." Nia let out a broken wail, collapsing in despair. Amina inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She turned away from the ruined woman before her, stepping out of the grand house for the last time. The sun bathed her in golden light as she walked down the path, finally free. Behind her, Nia remained on her knees, left to face the bitter truth: a heart filled with cruelty will one day be met with the bitter taste of its own actions.